Thank you. Thanks for being here tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces, people who were here last night for our film, Midnight Traveler. As you know, this three-day festival, which was primarily organized by the Exodus Institute based in DC, and Mr. Sam Feldman, who led the charge with this concept. As you know, each day sort of has a theme, and yesterday's theme, both movies, were about the journey, the hurdles that refugees, forced migrants, asylum seekers take to alleviate their bad circumstances in their home country, to find a new country, a new place where they can settle. And as you also have read today, the movies today are about resettlement, finding a new home, dealing with the issues of acclimating to a new home, which more normally is a different culture, a different country, a country that could be thousands of miles away from their mother country. And so it's a great pleasure to have this film, tonight's film, Barbara Kopple's film, New Homeland, to present this as part of our second day. And I'm going to ask Barbara to come up just for a moment, just to say a few words. Barbara is not a stranger to the vineyard. Barbara has been to the vineyard many times. And Barbara, even though it's very understated, is a twice award winner of the Academy Award for documentary for Harlan County, which most of you probably know, and American Dream. And both of those films, I believe, dealt with unions and strikes and the pursuit of the American dream, of course, and justice for the worker. This film's a little different, and it also is set in Canada. But I'll let Barbara mention why it's set in Canada, not the U.S.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. And as a filmmaker, you're always scared that you'll come and nobody will show up. And tonight some people came. Thank you very, very much. This was a film that I really wanted to do. I wanted to do something that sort of said to the American people, wake up. We have to do something. And Canada is just so responsive and so incredible. And they have sponsors that take care of the families and do everything and become part of the families. And this is a film through children's eyes. So I will be here after with an esteemed, beautiful panel, so please don't leave. If you can stay, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, just to underscore, we will have a panel discussion that will start probably as the credits are rolling. We'll get the chairs up here and the speakers up here. And please stay for, I believe it will be a very informative, enlightening discussion. Now I would like to introduce Nina Bonti, who is also part of the Exodus Institute team, has been very involved for 6 months or more in putting the festival together, and really was one of the facilitators in getting these great speakers that we've enjoyed the last several nights. So Anita, you have some words, I know.
Hi there, good evening. Thank you all for coming. I know you have other things you could do tonight, so I appreciate on behalf of Exodus that you're here. Very briefly, Exodus focuses on 3 areas: education, advocacy, and facilitation. Facilitation of the organizations around this issue, and also facilitating public awareness, which is what this film festival is doing, and also policy. So if you want to read more, you certainly can go on the website. We are grateful that the speakers that we have are going to be with us for the next day, the next couple days. 2 items, and of course I'm going to forget the first one, but I'll go to the second one. I want to congratulate the people here on the island, because in the fall they will initiate or launch or pilot, I have to correct my words, they will pilot a program K through 12 to integrate immigration into the curriculum. You'll hear more about this, but I think it's really a tribute to the educators and the teachers here. I know what I wanted to say, and it'll be my final word. In your little packets, your goodie bags, besides the candy, you'll see a notepad. We are going to try and do we will do a call to action, which we hope to not only share with the other agencies, but get around, we're all collecting. The notepad is for you. You should actually let us know what you think so that we can actually put it in. And we're looking for things constructively, in addition to voting. And I will stop at that point. Enjoy. Videos. Oh, excuse me, thank you. Ann Gallagher, who is our staff person in Washington and is really the core here. You're going to see two very short videos, one 4 minutes and the other one I think a minute or 2 minutes. These were done by university students from the University of North Carolina. I hope you can hear me because I've been talking. Anyway, thank you. I just wanted to give them credit because they're good videos. Thank you and enjoy the movie.
Hi, everybody. You guys are going to miss a really good panel.
No pressure.
But I'm glad she came to the film.
We're not leaving.
Okay.
Restroom break.
Oh, well, that's okay. All right, should we start or wait till they come back?
Sorry.
Okay.
It could be a while.
Okay, I understand. Well, I just wanted to say that making this film for me was an incredible honor. And I think, because you saw the film, there's not that much I could add, but I wanted to say that the film showed at Hot Docs in Canada, and all the families came, except for Omar, who is still in pretty bad shape and has been taken out of his home, and they're trying to give him the best therapy and the best care that they can. But this film showed 3 times. The first time, they were all incredibly struck. They had this huge sold-out audience all 3 nights. And by the second screening, all of them ran up on the stage, the kids, the parents. It was wonderful. Abdullah Darwish said that this was one of the best days of his life, to be able to see this film. His wife had never seen a film before on a screen. Hamid, after seeing the film, said, "I'm going back to camp." And the Zins had another baby, a little boy, so they allowed Mohammed to go back to camp. Because I guess they had their hands full. And the other Mohammed, Darwish, of course, went back to camp. So anyway, they're thriving, they're doing well, and it was just a phenomenal experience. Also for me to go camping and to bathe in a lake because there was no running water, and it was just...
All those boys.
Oh, what's wrong with that? No, it was really fun. So tonight, we have this unbelievable panel, and I think I'm going to let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their organizations, talk about the challenges that you go through, the good ones, and things you've succeeded with, and things that you have to struggle with, and also what all of us can do to help. So would you like to start?
Sure.
Hello, I'm Ed Shapiro. I run my family's foundation, and I started about 4 years ago getting involved with refugee causes. Traveled to Jordan and to Greece with my friend Mark here, and started learning about the refugee crisis. And then in the summer of 2016, partnered with HIAS, Mark's organization, and their local partner in Greater Boston. And we started a program to bring Syrian refugee families to Boston. The best way I can describe it is that we pretended to be Canadian. And we basically implemented a program like the sponsors that you saw in Barbara's wonderful film, and it was so moving to see it. What we basically did was started this program locally with a network of synagogues in Greater Boston. We started the process of what we thought would be about 12 families, and then there was an election that put a little bit of a wrench into our plans, but thanks to some very committed partners, we were able to get 8 families into Boston in a very short accelerated time that we thought we'd do over a year, and we basically had 10 weeks from election to inauguration, with a couple of court battles during beginning of 2017 that allowed us to get these 8 families in and have some of the same experiences without the camping. But there are challenges, and while the overall piece of it has been incredibly positive, it also has come with its challenges, as we saw in the film. But what my foundation and my wife started doing as a result of our local experience in Boston with the refugees, but the political situation as well, is turn our attention to Canada. As we saw just how impressive the culture, they've been doing this private sponsorship for 40 years. And we learned about it, doing it in Boston, and then turned our attention there, and really worked with some great partners. First, learning about the program in Canada and trying to find other places around the world to export it, to bring this bottom-up community sponsorship. We now are in 6 other countries that are in various pilots on 3 continents to start various ways to educate the local community, the giver and the receiver, getting these tremendous benefits, as you saw from the emotions in these families that you captured so beautifully. But then last summer really discovered that by understanding some of these programs and working with great partners, there were actually opportunities in Canada. It wasn't all about exporting Canadian, it was finding holes in these programs. And there's one particular program that perhaps these families came under, which is the most vulnerable refugees being resettled by private sponsors. And we found out that this one particular program that had 1,500 spaces last year was largely going unutilized for various reasons. And I had some appreciation from traveling around the world that those spaces, those Canadian slots, were so precious, and if we didn't do something about it, they were going to expire at the end of the year. So we put together a program with some great partners, the idea being to match sponsor groups throughout the country with these refugees. They have a fundraising obligation, and they had been doing a remarkable job. You know, the last year and this year, Canada will resettle more refugees than any country in the world, including the United States. But there's a limit. It's wonderful, it's a beautiful thing, and I think the world can learn from it, but there are limits. And so my concept was, if we take away the funding obligation, that there might be all kinds of beautiful volunteers throughout the country, in rural areas, that would want to welcome refugees, but they couldn't simply because of the financial requirements. So we put together a fund, a couple of partners, and the idea was, let's try it. Let's go publicize this. We had 7 weeks to try to see what we could do, and I think the range of expectations for what we might accomplish in the first year, given the time frame, was maybe 25. The most optimistic thought we'd do 50, and 3 months later we had matched 668 refugees, all of whom arrived. It was an incredible experience. Yes, there's pieces of it that were filmed. There's some amazing stories coming out of that. And what we really did was turn our attention to turning this into a sustainable program. My friend and partner, Barry Landry, who's here in the audience, was a remarkable supporter, and she joined me this year, and a few weeks ago we launched a renewal of the fund for 2019. We're on track now. I think we'll do, I want to be a little bit cautious, but I think we'll do at least 1,000 this year. It's been a remarkable program, and we're learning in each one of these. I think for me, the biggest lesson, surprise, is that the refugees themselves now have an opportunity to become the welcomers. Those that have now come in the last 3 or 4 years, they're getting settled. We've heard these stories. We heard consistently they want to give back. They want to be sponsors now. They can't because typically it requires some funding, but now with this program they can. And so we're partnering resettled refugees with sponsor groups throughout the country. They are now becoming sponsors themselves. So it's been incredibly rewarding, and again, an opportunity not only for the sponsors across the country and refugees themselves, but hopefully in other countries around the world, and that's what we're trying to do.
Hi everyone, my name is Cecilia Wong. I am a Deputy Legal Director at the National ACLU and formerly the Director of our Immigrants' Rights Project. What an honor to be on this stage. I'm a constitutional lawyer by training and by vocation. And I, for most of my career, have been an immigrants' rights advocate. And so, you know, I started in law school actually representing Haitian refugees who were being interdicted illegally by the United States government and jailed on Guantanamo Bay. I came back to the ACLU after several years working as a public defender in New York in 2004 to sue Donald Rumsfeld and 3 high-ranking US Army officers for torturing Iraqis and Afghans in military prisons in those 2 countries. And so to see these Iraqi families was really brought me back to that time. And throughout the 2000s, what I mostly did was sue state and local governments who were discriminating against immigrants out of an anti-Latino sentiment, including I was part of the team that successfully sued Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County, Arizona for racially profiling Latinos. And Arizona's anti-immigrant law, Alabama's, Georgia's, South Carolina. And now, for the last 2.5 years, have been overseeing and managing our litigation against the Trump administration. To say that we've been overtaxed is an understatement. To say that we are in the darkest period of US immigration and refugee policy in my lifetime is an understatement. But what really I've been thinking about, as much as the lawsuits and the arguments in court, I argued one of the 2 en banc US Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit arguments on behalf of Mark's organization, HIAS, and the International Refugee Assistance Project, challenging President Trump's Muslim ban. So we've been very busy, and we won until finally we lost, or the state of Hawaii lost. We all lost in the final stage in the Supreme Court, and the Muslim ban is now in effect in its 3rd watered down stage. So the thing I really think about, and I'll just end with this so we can get the conversation going, is those lawsuits, we're like firefighters. We are going out just trying to stop horrific things from happening to individuals and communities we care about. But we are also trying to stand up for the rule of law and for the ideals, right? The US has always had this oscillation between xenophobic policies and more welcoming policies. We see that now in our own country. I think it's fair to say we're divided, and there are lovely people, just like that camp director, who are doing amazing things. Not lawyers, advocates, professional advocates, but just regular people doing things to resettle refugees and to welcome refugees. And the thing I think about the most, and the reason I'm so moved by your film, Barbara, is we're going to keep being trapped in this oscillation between xenophobia and more progressive immigration and refugee policies until we move people, until everybody feels what we all had a chance to feel. Not all of us in this room have ever met or don't know an Iraqi refugee family or a Syrian refugee family. But if we can sit and watch Barbara's film, it's like we have. And I've just been thinking a lot about how we make that move to break out of this oscillation and get out of this moment.
So my name is Mark Hetfield. I'm the president of HIAS, which was founded as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society in 1881, which makes us the oldest refugee organization in the world. I started myself 30 years ago at HIAS as a caseworker, and I've quit 3 times, but I keep coming back. Although it is getting very challenging. About half our work is overseas, protecting refugees where they are. That's also getting challenging because the U.S. used to try to lead by example, and as an American NGO that was important for us, but now the U.S. is leading to the bottom. This is particularly true in the resettlement program. This was all about Canada, of course, but the U.S. has 2 ways it used to protect refugees and still does to some extent. One is, if you get to the United States, you can apply for asylum and protection. If you get to the U.S. on your own, you can't be returned to a country where you would be persecuted. But the other is through this resettlement program, like what you saw here in Canada, which is the U.S. can actually go around the world and handpick refugees that it's vetted, that it's assessed, meet the refugee definition, that don't pose a security threat, and bring them over. And the U.S. has brought over on average, with the partnership of HIAS and 8 other agencies like HIAS, an average of about 90,000 refugees a year since the refugee program was founded in 1980. When it was signed into law by President Carter, it was actually the brainchild of Senator Ted Kennedy, who was the primary author of the Refugee Act of 1980, which amazingly passed the Senate unanimously and passed the House of Representatives almost unanimously. Just imagine that happening today. So the downside of what Ed just said is, yes, Canada is now the #1 resettlement country in the world in terms of helping refugees, but that is an achievement for Canada, but it's also a shame on us because we have almost 10 times the population of Canada, and this year, 2019, marked the first year that Canada will have resettled more refugees than we have. When President Obama left office, the Refugee Ceiling, which the president sets every year, was 110,000. This was lowered to 45,000 by President Trump in his first year, but he only allowed 22,491 refugees in. So he couldn't even make half that ceiling. The following year, 2019, he lowered the ceiling again to 30,000. We're not going to make that number. We might come a little closer than last year. But the fiscal year ends on September 30th, and you may have seen the news reports just this past week that Stephen Miller in the White House is trying to put the refugee ceiling next year at 0. Not virtually 0, but literally 0, which will, of course, not only destroy the lives of every refugee that we should have brought in but won't be, but it will ruin the refugee infrastructure that has taken 40 years to build so that we can protect refugees and set an example for the rest of the world. So we really can't let that happen, but it is a very real possibility. I gave a talk last night at the Hebrew Center of Martha's Vineyard, and they said next time you should end with a joke. But sorry, I didn't have a chance to come up with one. Things are really quite dire, and we need your help.
Thank you.
I also heard that President Trump, dare I say president, but was just given money by the Supreme Court from the military to build walls. what can we do? I mean, each one of us goes through this and it's so horrific, the things that we see and we feel. What, in your opinion, can we do as a unit? What do we push for so that we can really feel powerful and be active in this?
Well, I'll leave the policy questions to my colleagues. What I've tried to do is basically two things, well, maybe three. One is I have a countdown, which I'm hopeful is 18 months. I'm fearful it's longer, but in 18 months, we do know we are in a democracy. Sometimes that's maybe hard lately to remember, but administrations end. And as Mark said, what we've tried to do is limit the long-term damage. It is horrific that there's been an 80+% reduction in the number of refugees being resettled. I was in Mark's office the day that President Obama announced we were going to 110,000, and that I was frustrated that it was only 110,000 because we used to do it at times 200,000. In the Syrian crisis, there's a great need. But what we've tried to do is there are, what's the number, a couple of million who have been resettled since 1980, and as we saw in your film, they have needs, whether they've come a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. Let's help them, let's build a pathway that shows these are not burdens, these are contributors to society, but they need support and they need help here, and it's a big world out there. And the US is a piece of it. Well, that's, I guess, above my pay grade. That's a political question, there's xenophobia, there's long-term rules. Unfortunately, as Mark described, the president has enormous unilateral control over the designation, the number that come in. So there are political pressures. It actually was encouraging to me that we've been able to actually stay above 20,000 for the last 2 years, as terrible as that sounds. At least we've gotten to that level of almost 2,000 a month. But there is this very real fear, as floated last week, that it could go to zero. And zero, besides the 20,000 that are being lost versus this year, has the real potential to do permanent harm, as Mark suggested. So there needs to be a concerted effort that my colleagues can speak about on how we can possibly avoid that, get through the next 18 months, help those that are here, help other countries, and then hopefully be in a position in a year and a half to resume as quickly as we can back to the historical levels at least.
So the border wall case is one of ours, and by my count, just on issues relating to asylum against the Trump administration, the ACLU, the national ACLU has brought 12 major cases. We've brought over 100 cases across the country during the Trump administration on immigration. And so I think I have a different perspective on it though. And I think looking for the solution, a solution is really to do more of this. The lawsuits, when they get up to the Supreme Court, will likely end in losses, many of them. And I think what's really key is that here's some inside baseball. I hope I don't bore you.
No.
So some inside baseball is that one thing that we all realized, Mark and I occupy very different universes. Even though for your average American, you probably think immigration, refugee, it's all kind of the same thing. Traditionally, there's an immigrants' rights movement, and there's a refugee resettlement movement or mechanism, an ecosystem. And those two didn't really intersect until Donald Trump. Well, it wasn't actually when Donald Trump was elected. It was when then Governor Mike Pence and Governor Greg Abbott of Texas went after refugee resettlement. And in a kind of burst of anti-Muslim fervor, anti-Syrian fervor, decided they were going to try to block refugee resettlement. So we sued Indiana, and then Texas tried to get the upper hand and sued another refugee resettlement organization, the International Rescue Committee, and we represented IRC, defended them against the state of Texas, and the United States was also sued by the state of Texas. So we did all those lawsuits, but what I want to get to with this inside baseball is I think the key mistake that we have made as a nation of people who understand the value of immigrants and refugees is we have bought into the paradigm of good immigrant, bad immigrant. And there is a sense that you have refugees who are deserving, who are coming here fleeing from torture and persecution and war. And then you have dreamers who did nothing wrong because they came here through they're not on their own power, but because their parents brought them here. And we have the Democrats, Bill Clinton signed the 1996 immigration law into effect. It's a draconian system we now have since 1996, where we started jailing people who were defending against their deportation cases en masse for the first time in modern immigration law. And so we now have the Trump administration picking up that loaded gun of the 1996 statute and its mandatory detention law and detaining over 50,000 people a night now. That's the average daily population in immigration detention. These are people who are defending against a deportation case. And in the realm of civil detention, so if you haven't been convicted of a crime under the US Constitution, if you're in pretrial criminal custody, you're defending against a criminal case, or if the state wants to allege that you have a psychiatric issue and are dangerous, you get an individualized hearing on whether the government has proved its case that you individually pose a flight risk or a danger, or they have a justification to lock you up. Only in immigration do we jail people as a country without an individualized hearing. And the Supreme Court approved that in 2003 in another ACLU case, which we unfortunately lost. And so I think the mistake is when President Obama, who had a very mixed record on immigration, right, was called deporter-in-chief by many immigrant communities, deported many times over. The Latino communities, Napolitano, who came from Arizona. And so, I think when President Obama said, look, you gotta get right with the law first, right? When Chuck Schumer, during all these legislative efforts at comprehensive immigration reform, would come out of the box saying, let's have more criminal penalties on undocumented immigrants and then give them a path to lawful status. That, I think, has softened the ground for Stephen Miller and Donald Trump to come in and do what they're doing. And so I think the silver lining of this Trump administration is people now understand, I think, what happens. The immigrants and refugees are the canary in the coal mine for American democracy. Can't vote. They're in marginalized communities often for refugees, often here without a penny, trained physicians, mechanical engineers coming here working in convenience stores, struggling to learn the language, bewildered, and their homes destroyed, and their countries lost. I think people now understand, and I think if we get the chance again, and inshallah, we will have the chance again, that means God willing in Arabic, we won't make the same mistake.
I'll just add to what Cecilia said. I'm not going to repeat it because I agree with it, but I'd say one huge mistake that we made, and not when we, I mean the Obama administration and the Congress, is we could have gotten comprehensive immigration reform, which would have helped refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants and dreamers through in the first 2 years of the Obama administration. But I think a political calculation was made by the Democrats that if they did that, they would lose the House. So they kicked that can down the road, and guess what? They lost the House anyway. We can't keep doing that. We have to prioritize immigration reform. This has been going on now for 3 decades, and it's enough already. You can see just how broken the system is now. And now we have an administration where it does take a really smart team to fix immigration, But it doesn't take smart people to break it hopelessly. And that's what's going on right now. At the beginning of the Trump administration, the head of IRC, David Miliband, said something that I often used to quote, which is the Trump administration is malevolence tempered only by incompetence. But that's not the case anymore. Now it's malevolence compounded by incompetence. And we have a lot of cleaning up to do. If God willing, we get the opportunity. So we really have to prioritize advocacy and no more procrastination on immigration reform.
I think that what really frightens me too is ISIS, that suddenly there are all these scares and people are petrified. And I know in New York and in other places they were going to round up people and deport people. Young students are writing stories and plays and so frightened of what could happen to their families. And I wonder what we can do to stop this tremendous fear and harassment and bully that are destroying people's lives and their mental fitness.
A quick hopeful word. There is a sociologist called Justin Steele who is a JD PhD. He was a summer intern with us when he was working on his dissertation. And have you all heard of Hazleton, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Right? So Justin did his dissertation on comparing Hazleton, which was one of the early cities to follow Chris Kobach, the noted anti-immigrant, anti-voting rights advocate, happens to be my law school classmate. He sold all these, before Arizona, he sold places like Hazleton on these anti-immigrant ordinances. So they were having landlords, private landlords, check people's immigration status before you could rent an apartment, that sort of thing. And Hazleton, famously, we sued them and won after a trial, and we struck down the law. In the meantime, though, the mayor who went for this, Leon Barletta, who's now in Congress, ruined his town's economy, right? Because the Latino immigrant new community was reviving this sort of Rust Belt town that had been on the skids. And so Justin compared Hazleton to another town, whose name I forget, which is a similar sized central Pennsylvania town 50 miles away, that was completely different. Very pro-refugee, they welcomed refugees to move to this town, very pro-immigrant. And what Justin found out is in a town of that size, it made one person could make the difference through leadership, through moral leadership. And so he said, there was the mayor in this other town. I really regret I can't remember the name of the town. The mayor in the other town, and some other key local leaders, faith leaders, really just went out there and said, as community leaders, as people with moral authority in the town, we are a welcoming town, and we are proud of that. And lo and behold, the community took on those values. And I think that's a really hopeful thing. It's a hopeful finding.
One of the things, I touched on it before, and I think you can't convince people or teach people to care if they don't care. But if we can find ways to turn the narrative of refugees as burdens, that there's a finite amount that each country can do, and turn them into assets. And the fact is there are developed countries who have low birth rates and aging populations that desperately need young adults who can work and contribute. They need language, in some cases they need skills, but part of the programs we're doing in Canada is to try to show that like Cecilia's example, that we can prove that this is actually a contribution, not just humanitarian peace. We have a burden as a developed country to play some leading role in that, which we've obviously now given up on, but as an economy that needs workers to care for aging Americans and other countries, therein I think lies the opportunity, and Canada's doing a lot of that, and that's what we're trying to show, that process can work in really in any country.
Yeah, I want to just add to what Ed just said. When you watch this film, one of the things you might think is, oh my God, these refugees are such a burden. They're on welfare, they can only work part-time, they're struggling on their own, but it shows the first, well really just the first year, and then the prologue goes to the second year maybe. But you have to look at it over the long term. And when the Trump administration took office, one of the things they did in the executive orders was they demanded that Health and Human Services do a study on the cost of refugees to our society. And so a study was undertaken by Health and Human Services, and they determined that over time, refugees contributed, and I'm not making this number up, $63 billion more in taxes than they took in services over, of course, a long period of time. And needless to say, you know, the administration just wanted the costs. They didn't want the benefits. So they weren't happy with that, and so the study never made it out of draft form, but you can read it online because it was leaked to the Washington Post and the New York Times. Just Google $63 billion refugees, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Wow.
Well, I've been told by Anne through sitting there that we're going to have to end this evening. And I just want to say that all of you are so amazing and working so hard and so beautiful and so tough. And that I've learned so much from you tonight. And thank you very, very much. Thank you for coming.